Can you believe it? Every generation today is using the money in their own wallets to vehemently look down on the generation before them. A 68-year-old thinks today, young people are wasting their lives by not buying a home. A 52-year-old middle-class professional thinks running a side hustle on TikTok is a complete waste of time. A 38-year-old millennial could care less about housing prices. They pouring all their money into coffee and travel. And a 24-year-old Gen Z is buying trendy mugs while skillfully managing investments and watching compound interest grow. Mansion homes, European SUVs, trendy brunch spots, minimalist investing. We all think we've been handed a brand new script, convinced we're far smarter than the generation before us. But what if I told you these four people have all fallen into the exact same trap? Not just a similar predicament, but the exact same behavioral finance trap. It's like a highly deceptive virus that changes its disguise with every generation. Do you think you're spending money on your own terms? In reality, you've simply fallen for the same trap. Give me 3 minutes. Not only will I help you peel back this disguise, but by the end, you'll instantly recognize which variant of this trap your current spending habits actually represent. Before I name this trap, I need to make one thing clear. Falling into it has absolutely nothing to do with poor financial management, nor is it a result of stupidity or recklessness. In fact, quite the opposite is true. Most people who fall into this trap are cautious and hardworking. They check their bank accounts and think before swiping their cards. This trap is far more cunning than simple overspending. In behavioral finance, we call this the signal trap. Here's how it works. In every generation's narrative, there comes a point when the surrounding culture defines what doing well is supposed to look like. Society creates a template, a certain kind of house, a certain kind of car, a certain lifestyle, a specific aesthetic that loudly proclaims, "I've made it, I'm secure, I've arrived." No one ever actually taught you this in a classroom. You absorbed it subconsciously. Through your parents, the TV shows you watched, your peers, and now the algorithms on your phone. You see what's praised and envied, and you subconsciously take note. When you reach the point where you can afford that version of living well, you buy it. It feels like the natural next step. You aren't being greedy. You're simply following the invisible script your generation handed down to you. A script no one questions, because everyone around you is blindly reading from the same page. The most dangerous part of this trap is that, from the inside, it never feels wrong. It feels like a responsibility, like progress. So, let's put these four generations under the microscope. Listen closely to when the script takes over. Because once you can spot the trap in other people's lives, you can start to see it in your own. First, let's look at David, a baby boomer. David grew up in the aftermath of the war. He watched his parents rent their entire lives, always at the mercy of their landlords. For his generation, the ultimate sign that you've made it was home ownership. Owning a home wasn't just about having a place to live. It was about status, stability, and the symbol of wealth represented by white picket fences. So, when David landed his first decent management job and the bank told him he could borrow the maximum amount, he took it. That was standard operating procedure. That's what a responsible man was supposed to do. And the math of the 1980s, to some extent, supported him. Interest rates were sky high, but inflation was soaring, and real estate was appreciating wildly. That house would indeed increase his net worth, and that's exactly what happened. Today, David's house is worth 4 to 5 times what he paid for it. On paper, David is rich. But in behavioral finance, we call him house rich, cash poor. That's where the trap snaps shut. David is 68 years old, and he's tired. But nearly 90% of his net worth is trapped within the 4 dry walls where he sleeps every night. He doesn't have the golden corporate pension he thought he'd have, because American companies underwent ruthless restructuring in the 1990s. He has a 401k account, but the balance is nowhere near enough to comfortably support 25 years of retirement. What are his options? He could sell his house to liquidate his assets, but selling the house means leaving the community he's called home for 40 years, leaving behind the garden he built with his own hands and all the memories tied to it. Listen carefully. The house itself isn't the trap. The trap is the generational belief that a house is the entire financial plan. David spent decades pouring all his capital into the ultimate symbol of baby boomer wealth: renovations, new roofs, landscaping, while completely neglecting his actual financial freedom. He bought a castle, but forgot to build a moat. Now, look at Susan. Her trap is entirely different, quieter and more subtle. Susan's trap wasn't set by a single massive signature, but through 100 tiny, perfectly reasonable, and entirely legitimate decisions. Generation X grew up during the peak of dual-income households and corporate ladder climbing. They looked at their baby boomer parents and thought, we're going to do better. We're going to earn more and experience more. And they certainly did. Susan earns a high salary, but there's a psychological glitch here. Every time Susan gets a raise, her lifestyle magically expands to swallow up the raise. When she got her first promotion at 32, she traded in her perfectly adequate Honda for a luxury SUV. Because she deserved it. By 38, with the family income breaking the six-figure mark, they moved to a slightly bigger house in a slightly better neighborhood. When the kids started middle school, the standard summer road trip turned into a flight to Europe. Every decision made perfect sense at the time. She could afford the mortgage payments. She worked 60 hours a week. She deserved a reward. In finance, we call this the hedonic treadmill, or lifestyle creep. It's the silent killer of wealth. Lifestyle creep is the baby boom trap, dressed up in sleek business casual attire. The problem isn't that Susan spent money. The tragedy is that her spending grew just as fast as her income. So even though Susan earns more in a month than her parents did in half a year, her actual savings rate, the portion of her income she sets aside, has barely changed over the past 2 decades. The gap between her income and expenses is just as narrow as it was when she was 25, only with a few more zeros at the end. At 52, Susan is the epitome of wealth. She has assets and nice things, but she's staring into the abyss of retirement a decade away. And for someone who's been earning a high income for over 2 decades, the math is alarmingly tense. For Generation X, the signal of arrival is lifestyle, upgraded experiences, high-end brands, and proving you're a successful professional. With every monthly automatic payment, Susan sends this signal to society perfectly. But she's forgotten to pay her future self. Next up is Mike. If you're a millennial reading this, I need you to pause and listen to me clearly. The macroeconomic system is indeed working against you in ways you cannot control. You are the generation that graduated after the 2008 financial crisis. During the critical early years of your careers when you should have been building a foundation through compound interest, an entire cohort was wiped out. Then came stagnant wages, skyrocketing healthcare costs, and a housing market completely detached from reality. This is real, and it makes sense. But we still need to talk about the psychological trap that millennials, as a coping mechanism, have walked straight into. When a generation realizes they can't afford the traditional signals of success, big houses, stable pensions, stock portfolios, human psychology does something interesting. We pivot. We substitute. We start spending money on things we can afford to send signals of value. For millennials, the new signals became experiences. Artisanal coffee, boutique fitness classes, music festivals, various subscriptions, and curated travel. The insidious nature of this trap lies in the fact that the entire cultural atmosphere supports it. Every lifestyle brand, every viral blog post, and every Instagram influencer tells millennials buying experiences instead of things is in fact spiritual enlightenment. You can't take money to the grave. Collect moments, not things. Travel is the only thing you buy that makes you richer. We've convinced an entire generation that it's foolish for older people to save money, and that spending every penny on life experiences is the ultimate wisdom. In behavioral finance, this is called financial nihilism, a subconscious belief that since you can't win the big game, like buying a house, you might as well spend your money now to feel good. In his 20s and early 30s, Mike frantically accumulated countless wonderful memories. They were indeed wonderful. But today, at 38, Mike has invested almost no capital and owns no real estate. Beneath his relaxed, worldly exterior lies a deep anxiety about his financial future, an anxiety he temporarily alleviates by booking his next weekend getaway. For Mike, the trap isn't in the travel or the fine dining itself. The trap lies in using experiences as an emotional substitute for building hard assets, and in letting the entire marketing industry convince him that being broke, but having a passport full of stamps, is a badge of honor. The signal of a millennial's success is a carefully curated story of a wonderful life. It's marketed so effectively that they don't even realize it's just a consumer trap. It's the same signaling behavior as the baby boomers' big houses, just with a backpack and a linen shirt. Finally, there's Emily. Emily's case is particularly interesting because Gen Z is undoubtedly the most financially literate generation in history. They grew up watching finance YouTube channels. They knew what an S&P 500 index fund was before they were even old enough to drink. They casually discuss compound interest and cryptocurrency in TikTok comments. Since they have all this information, you'd naturally assume they've escaped the trap, right? They've seen through the matrix. Not necessarily. The trap for Gen Z is actually the most obvious one ever, because it exists entirely online. For Gen Z, the ultimate status symbol isn't a house in the suburbs, a corporate lifestyle, or a passport stamped with travel visas. The ultimate status symbol is aesthetics. Carefully curated outfits, a cinematic tech-filled desk with warm-toned lighting. Lifestyle vlogs of a day in the life of a 24-year-old shot like a luxury film, and buying those specific trendy brands. All send a message to the world. I have taste. I get the culture. I have money. I.V. made it. The psychological trap here is cruelly ironic, because Gen Z is highly financially savvy. They do all these things while investing. Emily has a brokerage account. She proudly sets up a monthly automatic investment of $50 into a total market ETF. She certainly has reason to be proud. Starting to invest at 24 is impressive, but there is a massive disconnect here. She simultaneously spends $200 a month on clothes, accessories, and iced matcha lattes. Items whose primary psychological function is simply to look good on camera. Gen Z's trap isn't financial ignorance, it's financial performance. They know all the right buzzwords. They talk about financial freedom and passive income, but they use this language to perform wealth rather than quietly building it. They create viral videos about investing, while their actual net worth is completely devoured by maintaining the successful young investor aesthetic. They let their spending habits quietly strangle their investment goals. Emily is definitely not doomed. She is only 24, and she is way ahead of where Mike was at her age. But the trap's jaws are snapping open, and she's standing right on the trigger point. It's the exact same trap, just with white picket fences swapped out for ring lights and carefully curated Spotify lo-fi background music. So, 4 people, 4 generations, 1 identical psychological trap, prioritizing the signals of wealth over the substance of wealth. The ultimate question is, how do you truly escape? Because some people do escape. In every generation, there is a small group of quiet individuals who see through the trap and navigate around it. When you study these people, when you observe the behavioral economics of those who are truly quietly wealthy, you'll find they all do exactly the same fundamental thing. They consciously decouple their net worth from social signals. They deliberately make slightly uncomfortable decisions to make themselves appear less wealthy than they actually are, so their real wealth can compound in the shadows. They delay putting on the success costume. Truly wealthy people will drive their reliable old car for another 5 years. They'll continue living in a small house even when the bank tells them they can afford a mansion. They'll decline group trips to Tulum. They'll strongly resist the impulse to upgrade their lifestyle with every pay raise. They take all that redirected capital, the difference between what they earn and what they spend, and force it into appreciating assets. This is simple math, but psychologically painful because it goes completely against every one of our evolutionary social instincts. Humans are born wanting status. We want our tribe to know we're doing well. That's why smart, educated, highly self-aware people fall into this trap every day. If we could rewrite history, what would our 4 friends' escape routes look like? For David, a baby boomer, escaping means keeping the house but actively diversifying capital. Don't put all your eggs in the drywall basket. Ensure your stock portfolio is as robust as your real estate. For Susan, a Gen Xer, the escape route is a simple rule: limit your lifestyle. With every raise, allow only half to go toward upgrading your lifestyle. and ruthlessly auto-invest the other half. Let your income outpace your self-indulgence. For Millennial Mike, the solution is balance. Take one deep, meaningful trip a year instead of 4 impulsive getaways, and use the money saved to automatically buy real equity in the stock market every month. Stop numbing financial anxiety with brunch and start healing it with ownership. For Gen Z star Emily, she still has plenty of time to win this race. Escaping means making actual investments something to be proud of, rather than focusing on the aesthetics of investing. It means actively building real numbers in her brokerage account, rather than building the aesthetics of having that number. If you want to set a golden rule for yourself to avoid generational traps, it is this: assets first, lifestyle second every single time. This doesn't mean you have to eat rice and beans and suffer forever. It just means you postpone lifestyle inflation until your assets generate enough passive income to actually pay for that lifestyle. This is the ultimate financial move. Every generation that got it right figured out this specific sequence. David, Susan, Mike, Emily. Not a single one of them is bad with money. Not a single one is stupid. They simply followed the definition of success that their specific culture told them to pursue. They prioritize looking like they've made it over doing the boring, invisible work required to actually get there. So, before I wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a question. I really want you to look at your bank statement and sit with it for a moment. Which version of this trap are you living in right now? Is it the house that's devouring all your liquidity? Is it the lifestyle that mercilessly expands with every paycheck? Is it the aesthetic experiences that feel like living but are quietly replacing your ability to build real equity? Or is it that online performance pretending to have wealth without actually creating it? In behavioral psychology, the first step to dismantling a trap is having the courage to name it. Identify your trap, name it, then step out of it. If this video resonated with you today, please share it with someone in your life who needs to hear it, because they likely already know which trap they're stuck in. Build assets, ignore the noise. See you next time.